Right, thank you, Robert, for the presentation. We won't rehash the whole history of this project. It's long, but I will kind of highlight a couple things that have always been of a concern to me with Vista Ridge. The first one is, or actually they all are under the umbrella of risk management. I mean, I think there's an incredible value to this community to be able to ensure long-term water security, and that requires quantity issues, requires quality issues, it also requires diversification. One of the key elements of the risk mitigation is the planning risk of the Vista Ridge water, and the sense that we know based on projections we have long-term water shortage potential, but near-term we won't need much, if any, of this water. You had a slide on there with regard to wholesale water, contracts. I think it was the slide after that. Maybe not. Okay. There was a slide on there with regard to wholesale. There it is. It was always the direction from the City Council, even dating back to October 2014, that excess water to lower the cost impact to SAWS customers, but also to deal with the planning risk of the water supply, would be sold to communities that needed the water along the 35, along the Central Texas corridor, along the route of the pipeline. I made these comments during the SAWS board meeting this past week, but I think it's worth reiterating, and also to get additional direction from the council, which is that we very much would be interested in doing that if it did indeed reduce the cost impact to SAWS customers, number one, that SAWS customers, San Antonio water users, who are holding themselves to increasingly high standards of conservation, we want to continue to pursue that, would also have essentially the right of first refusal for this water. This is for our water future. And the third is that for us, with a conservation ethic, to place conditions on the purchase of that water to ensure that other communities developing would also observe that same kind of conservation ethic. Can you speak to those, and also to the extent to which other communities have expressed an interest or a need for this water?
If I could go in reverse order, there is a lot of interest in the purchase of some of this water. The very identifiable interest and immediate interest right now is for very small amounts, and by small I mean about 1,000 to 2,000 acre feet. There are contracts that we could enter into within a short period of time to provide the water. The details of that are what's going to be subject to a lot of conversation with our board and with council to make sure that what you just mentioned, for example, makes its way into those contracts. So there's opportunities there. Another comment that you made is the impact on this to our ratepayers, that if we do sell some of this water, how will our ratepayers benefit? And, excuse me. We did do a, can you help me, slide 26? If we do sell 5,000 acre feet or 10,000 acre feet or 15,000 acre feet, you'll see the potential reductions in our bills of our to our customers. The current projection is $82.54, and you'll see a natural progression downward depending on the more water you sell. So it's there's opportunities there. If you sell 1,000, 2,000 acre feet, it's a very nominal sense to our customers.
There was concern last year at about this time that the right-of-way acquisitions for the pipeline themselves were nowhere near what was projected, which was going to be a problem for financing, but also for the completion of the actual project. Where are we now, and when do we project to be done?
Done can be explained, is the definition of done. There's numerous definitions, but the project financing is done in the sense that the remaining rights-of-way issues have not hindered the ability to obtain financing for the project. There is only out of 511 parcels, there's only 2 or 3 left that are still outstanding. But they're outstanding in the sense that there's still negotiations going on, but their agreement has been reached as to the transfer of that property to the project company so that the pipeline can be built. Nancy, am I saying that correctly? Okay.
There's also political risk because the Burleson-Milam County area, which has what is the groundwater conservation district is called?
Post Oak Savannah.
Post Oak Savannah, has the ability to turn down or turn off the water if they need it for their own communities. And it's an important protection for that community because they reside over the water, but it also places some political risk on the San Antonio water customer who may depend on that water in the future. How are we mitigating that risk, and where are we with that process?
We're mitigating it in 2 ways. One is if there is a cutback, and only 40,000 acre feet, for example, is delivered, that's all that we pay for. But then we have essentially 10,000 acre feet that we were planning on and not getting. So if we are in the out years and we do need that water, obviously there'll be an advance notice that that's happening. And we have essentially our local Carrizo Aquifer project on hold that can be expanded, and our desalination plant that can also be expanded. So if you're talking about the mitigating the lack of water, it's those 2 projects. If you're talking about the financial issue, it's you don't have to pay for that water that doesn't come. Did I answer your question?
To some extent, but the concern is bigger than that. It's not just about how much we would have to pay, because we know that if we don't receive the water, we wouldn't have to pay for it. But there is concern if we're depending on this water in 55 years from now, say, that at the time when we're going to need all 35 to 50,000 acre feet of it, the Groundwater Conservation District is starting to turn it off because they need it as well. So what guarantees do we have with regard to the delivery of the amount of water that we will need in those out years?
Well, that's the risk
And who is that risk borne on?
The risk is borne on the project company, on Garney or whoever the new operator would be. And that is that they are relying on being able to sell 50,000 acre feet and getting the revenue associated with that. So if all of a sudden there's a cutback by the groundwater district and it's 40,000 acre feet, their revenue essentially is cut by 1/5, but they take on that risk. We do not. They still have to pay for all of the infrastructure, all of the debt service.
Project company.
Correct.
Okay, and so now why it's relevant for the wholesale conversation as well is that if we enter into contract with communities along the Central Texas corridor who will buy water that we don't need yet, how long are those terms going to be, and will we retain the authority to turn down those contracts if we, in fact, in out years need it ourselves?
That will be a negotiation point, and you can imagine if you're on the other side of the bargaining table, they're going to want certainty. They're going to want as long a term as possible. They're not going to want to give much on that particular point, and so that's going to be a negotiation point. It's going to be something that we're going to need guidance from our board to saying this is these are the parameters under which these contracts are to be negotiated. Some of the other things that you mentioned, for example, our conservation ethic and those cutbacks are all part of that, so it'll be part of the negotiation.
Okay. And so I'll end my comments with 2. One of them is that this is why diversification is so important. I know we have an up to 3-phase desalination project that is underway. It's already delivering water. We also are pushing hard on conservation. We'll be implementing new technologies to help with that as well. The question came up at the board, does this mean with this amount of water we can loosen up our restrictions? And I was glad to hear a couple of the other board members speak up and say emphatically no. I would wholeheartedly agree with that, and that's more of a question for my colleagues as we think about drought restrictions and our water policies and our own code, how we manage this water, but also ensure that we're not using this water to loosen up the good ethic that we have had with conservation. And then the last thing I would say is it's really important as we look at Vista Ridge coming online that we use it as an opportunity not just to ensure long-term water security, but also to do what the state has failed to do, which is to ensure water security for a region, but also a good water ethos for the region as well. We know when we drive through Austin, San Antonio, and beyond that, there is a lot of development happening, and there's virtually no sense of a water culture. We have an opportunity, if we do engage in partnership with these other communities, to ensure that that culture is built on strong conservation, on good sustainable development, and so forth. And so I hope as we enter in those conversations that we're putting that on the front burner.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Councilman Pelaez.
Thank you, Mayor. Robert, Abengoa is out of the picture completely, right?
They have no controlling interest. They do have a 20% interest in the project.
Okay. Let's assume that their restructuring plan, because right now Abengoa Water Spain is going through this tremendously difficult restructuring plan. Let's assume that they just fold up their tent and implode, and they're no longer going into. They're a cadaver, right? What is the impact on us if that were to happen?
Nothing, because the 20% is on the other side of the ledger. It is something that the project company is responsible to pay for.
Okay. Did you and do you anticipate a change at all in how you're going to manage and carry out this project now that Abengoa is out and Garney's in?
Well, Garney is 100 times easier to work with. Everything from logistically, just because they're here in the United States, and same language, for example, but we have a long history with them. They have been doing work for SAWS and for our sewer system when the sewer system was part of the city of San Antonio for over 50 years. So we have a very good relationship with them. We also understand that through the negotiations that have been going even after the contractual commercial close, I'm talking about financial close, we were able to reach further negotiations, and I don't want to call them concessions because this is something that was negotiated on both our sides. But for example, better materials. It went from fiberglass pipe to steel pipe. So those are things that I think we benefit from the fact that we have Garney in place of Abengoa.
So when I've heard you in the past say something along the lines like we're in a better place now than we were when we were with Abengoa. That's the case?
Yeah, Abengoa's financial misfortune, unfortunately, we were able to take advantage of.
Okay. As far as changes in building out infrastructure inside of Bexar County to get ready to receive this Vista Ridge water, are we on track to complete this, and are we doing that in-house, or how are we doing that?
Yes, we are on track. We did hit a bump in the sense that we originally had Keywood Construction to do this project under a guaranteed maximum price. When we interviewed them, when we negotiated with them, they did say they could meet our budget. Through the initial design of up to 30%, it was showing that they could not and would not, so we dismissed them. No money was spent. These were just projections. And so we're going to do a lot of that in-house with Black & Veatch, with Tetra Tech, and then the construction projects will be let out in different packages.
Did you see having to move milestones and a timeline, or like a delay? Did you have a delay?
Internally, but the milestone of April 2020, when the project will be online, and prior to that, January 2020, when the testing needs to happen, those will not move. Those are, staff is here. They know that they're all shaking their heads. They know that that's an immovable object. It's not going to happen where we are late on this.
Okay, so just to make sure, January of 2020, we're going to start getting Vista Ridge water.
The testing happens in January. The actual payments that we have to make are in April. It has to be done by April.
Okay. Okay, so when?
So the project will be completed, inside of Bexar County will be completed by the end of 2019, 2019, for the testing to begin in January of 2020.
Okay, so I don't know what testing means. So when will a San Antonian drink Vista Ridge water?
April 2020.
Okay. When I go and visit HOAs and neighbors and voters, quite often I'm encountered with objections to the Vista Ridge contract, and I can't believe Vista Ridge, and I hate Vista Ridge. And then when I drill down and ask them, what's Vista Ridge? I've yet to have one tell me accurately what it is and what they really hate about it. And so there's been a lot of, and a lot of them say things like, well, my neighbor told me to hate about it, so I hate it, right? And that's okay. I mean, they get their information from certain places. If I was to be curious to dig into something, this presentation or, Vista Ridge for the layperson, is there somewhere on your website where I can go and get as much information as my heart desires about Vista Ridge?
On our website there is a lot of information regarding that. There's information regarding the continuous projects that we have to build out the infrastructure. Our own internal workforce inspects the construction that's going on. We get a weekly report. Those are not necessarily on the web, but they are obviously public documents. So yes, a lot of information is available. For over 24 months now, probably closer to 36 months, every single month we have a presentation to our board on Vista Ridge. So there's a public vetting of the project every single month for the last 36 months.
Okay, so two issues. One is I frequently get the request, you need to get us out of this Vista Ridge deal. Is it possible to get us out of the Vista Ridge deal right now, or is that ship sailed?
Well, it's possible, but it'll cost you $540 million, which essentially is the cost of the project.
Okay.
So we would have to substitute ourselves in for Garney, the construction company, and what investments they've made already, what expected return they have on their borrowing of the capital, on their equity, all kinds of things that go into buying this project out.
And to the mayor's very astute point, we'd still have to go and buy water from somewhere, right? And we'd have to do it in a way that lives up to this water ethic that we're trying to develop.
Yes.
Okay. Lastly, I'll tell you, my friend and former professor from Trinity, Meredith McGuire's here, and every time she's in the room, I feel like she's about to tell me that I didn't turn in my last assignment. And so, but Meredith, you're holding up a sign that I've heard other people say something very similar, right? And yours says, "Don't force San Antonians to subsidize discounts for people in other towns." Do we? And can you walk me through that?
I think I'll ask her exactly what she means, but I think what she means by that is the wholesale of water.
Okay.
That if we do wholesale this water out, that it needs to be the Vista Ridge price. Otherwise, people from, say, San Marcos are paying lower for that water than we are.
Okay.
And so we don't want to necessarily subsidize those other people in those other towns.
Thank you, Mr. Puente. I appreciate it.
Did I get that right, Meredith?
Okay. Thank you, Meredith.
Thank you. Are there any other council colleagues? Okay. Councilwoman Sandoval.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Puente, for your presentation. I wanted to go back to the beginning of your presentation. Thank you for telling us about your RFP process. I have some questions about that. So, you developed that in-house, or how? I guess how did you determine that you needed 50,000 acre feet?
Well, in-house, we continuously monitor our inventory, monitor the weather, monitor our demands, and we know what our situation is. So there was always the knowledge that planning for the drought of record, worst case scenario, that we were going to have shortages at different times depending on rainfall. They were a lot sooner or a lot later, but we always knew that we needed additional water into this city through our planning efforts.
And so no other requirements on there? Sorry, what were your stipulations in the RFP
Oh,
when you issued that?
essentially that we wanted 50,000 acre feet. Initially, it was 20,000 acre feet, growing to 50 because we were going to grow as a city. But the infrastructure would have been the same, so we changed it essentially to 50,000 acre feet. That was one of them. We didn't want the project originating from the Edwards Aquifer because we wanted to diversify away from it. And we wanted them to accept most of the risks, and those risks being the financing risk, the construction risk, and the permitting risk of the groundwater coming from wherever part of the state that we're going to bring the water in. And that was the key one, that if the locally elected groundwater district, for whatever reason, at any time, cut the production, that we didn't have to suffer the consequences of that. So those were the major parts of the negotiating of this in the RFP that we wanted.
And never in there was there anything about water reuse or, I mean, it was always going to be some new water
Yes,
source. It wasn't going to be recycled water at all?
Well, it was 50,000 acre feet. We didn't specify that it could be brackish, that it could be recycled water, but it was 50,000 acre feet. No one in this area has 50,000 acre feet of recycled water available to us. Well, I guess
right,
they could,
but you could have,
yes.
A part here or a
Yes.
part from somewhere else. So you said you got 9 submissions, only 3. Tell me.
9 submissions. We narrowed it down to 3. And those 3, one was from Del Rio area, one was from Dimmitt County area, and then the Burleson County is the one that we picked.
And you said you picked it because they already had the permits.
Yes. Well, yes, they rose to the top because out of all of them, they had water in hand. They had permits, existing permits.
So, but was that a stipulation when you issued the RFP? Like you have to have the permits?
Was it, Nancy? No. No, it was not a stipulation.
But that gave them more points in your ranking process?
Yes.
And so those permits, are they permanent?
Yes. No. They're time. They're subject to time. This particular groundwater district, unlike almost all of them in the state, grants permits for a longer period of time. Some grant permits for like 5 years. The permits that we have in Church Seguin project from Gonzales County, some of them expire in 5 years, and we have to renew them. These were 40 and 30-year permits that they had.
So,
and I say two because one of them is a production, get the water to the ground, and the other one is a transport to be able to move the water out of the county.
I guess how did they compare to the other firms in different ways? I mean, because you said that the requirement was that the bidder would take on the risk. So, whether they had the permits in hand now or not, they would have had to find a way to get the water, right? So how did the other ones compare?
Well, Dimmitt County, for example, was groundwater district, their Dimmitt County groundwater district. Their general manager wrote us a letter essentially saying, if the company comes asking for a permit, we're not going to give them one. That kind of threw them out. The other one from Del Rio, there's no groundwater district there, so there's no regulation. The problem with them is that the wells that they were citing were too close to Lake Amistad, so essentially where they were probably going to get the water from the lake. The groundwater was probably going to be coming from the pressure of the surface lake next door. So those two things, and there was a lot of opposition of the Del Rio one because of some threatened species, Devil's River minnow, I think it was, and they had a very organized opposition to their particular project if we picked that one. And so just by elimination, those kind of fell off, and the fact that Abengoa had the permits also helped them tremendously.
Did you collaborate with any of the other water boards or water districts in the area regarding alternatives to Vista Ridge?
Yes, as a matter of fact, GBRA was one of the 9 entities that submitted. Their project just didn't score as well as the other ones. We did talk to other districts. There's a common mood out there that I want to control my own destiny. So even smaller cities like Schertz, Cibolo, Live Oak, They're very parochial in the sense that they want to, Alamo Heights, they always want to control their own destiny. So it's very hard to get a regional kind of group together.
Thank you. And then the water, you said we're getting the water whether or not we're going to use it here in San Antonio, right? We're responsible for...
If the water makes it to the Bexar County line, we have to pay for it, yes.
So where is it going if we don't use it?
Well, we're going to use it. It's just that then we won't use other water that we have. That other water that we have, we will store. And so the 50,000 acre feet that comes on the Vista Ridge pipeline will be used. Either if it's a hot summer day, most of it will be used within that immediate area. If it's a cold winter day like we've had, it'll make its way all the way down to Almost Basin and maybe even further south. So that if let's say that we have a very low demand day like today, so we would be pumping less Trinity water, less Edwards water, or pump the same amount of Trinity and Edwards water and just store it in our ASR. Not Trinity water, I'm sorry, Edwards water.
And how will that water be different quality-wise than the water that we have here today?
That's one of the requirements that we made in this project, is that it be compatible with Edwards for a lot of reasons. One of them is very simply, we don't want our customers to notice the difference. We want them to be confident that the water that they're using, drinking, bathing, cooking, is of the same quality throughout our service area. But also, if you introduce a different type of water into your pipes that it's not accustomed to, you could have some problems. And that's what happened in Flint, Michigan. They used a different water source in their pipes.
Mm-hmm. All right, thank you, Mr. Puente.
Thank you, Councilwoman Sandoval. Councilwoman Villagran.
Thank you, Mayor. And just to, I think, reiterate what we've discussed a long time ago, when you were talking about your major policy decisions that are going to be coming up, I think it is important because we are looking at water security for ourselves, and we're doing a lot of investment here right now with the Vista Ridge. But I was also always, when we were talking about Vista Ridge, is to look to sell the excess water that we will be getting, but that we are going to have that first right of refusal and make sure that we, San Antonio, are taken care of before we wholesale that water. That's correct?
Is that correct that that's
what we would do? Make sure that San Antonio is taken care of first.
what I, as staff
Yes.
of the water
Recommendation.
system, what I would want to do is educate our board as to what this wholesale thing means, and we started that. We just had a board presentation. Also City Council, and obviously we have the uniqueness of having your mayor as our board member, so he has a leg up on getting this information, and so he presumably would have the pulse of the council. So if that's one of the issues that's very important to our board and our council, then that makes its way into the negotiating points.
Well, that's something important to me, so I want to make sure that that's part of the discussion that you have with your board as well. But also to make sure that we do have the ability to sell that water, the excess water too. And then,
well, the more restrictions that are put on there, the harder it is to sell. To fulfill
I understand. I understand that. But of course, this is in the future, and we also want to make sure that we never lose the sight of our first priority, which will always be conservation, too, so that we will, I know, carry that mantra here at the city, at least in District 3. And then just out of curiosity, because I know it's been cold and then hot and rainy and not, what is our aquifer level right now?
It's
Somebody better know that.
664.
Okay. 664. I'm going to probably Google it too, just to make sure that you're telling me the truth. All right. Okay. Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilwoman Villagran. Councilman Courage.
Thank you, Mayor. I was intrigued by something that you had mentioned early in the presentation about one of the components of the overall project is, I think you said, to develop an electric power system?
To provide power for the, to be responsible for the electricity to move the water.
Okay, so it wouldn't be another electric power business where you'd sell electricity?
No.
Okay, thank you. You indicated that based on the amount of water that we may sell, that it would bring down the average bill about $2.50 if you sold 15,000 acre feet, I believe it was. Is that correct?
I'm looking for the slide right now. If
Yeah, it was
somebody-
the wholesale slide?
Yes. It's 26. Yeah.
Yeah, the difference between $82.54 and $80.02 is $2.52.
Yeah, if we sold the maximum of 15,000 acres.
Right, uh-huh. And what would be the sale price of that water to determine that rate that you used to determine that rate?
That's the Vista Ridge price.
So that would be if we sold the water for $1,600 an acre foot.
No, well, it's this price is based on what we originally negotiated in the contract, which is $1,959. So already, because we were able to lower the price, this number is going to be lower. So then these numbers become lower also.
Oh, so they'll actually be, that was based on the 1,900, but since
Correct.
we've got 16-something, that those will really be lower.
Correct.
So the price could be closer to 78 on the low end or something like that instead of 80.
Correct.
Yeah, okay. I'm still concerned about what we're going to do with 50,000 acre feet in a rainy year, because no one else is going to buy it, but we still have to buy it. Burleson will have it if it's a rainy year. And are you just saying we wouldn't pump 50,000 acre feet out of the aquifer?
The project company is going to want to maximize its return, so they're going to want to pump as much as they can pump. Let's say it's the full 50,000 acre feet.
Right.
If it's a cold, wet, rainy day, that 50,000 acre feet, and remember, it doesn't come all on one day, but
Yeah.
whatever comes. Those Vista Ridge water molecules will be used by our customers. We may not have the need to have that much purchased by our customers, so what we would do is essentially not pump as much Edwards, or still pump as much Edwards, but store it in our ASR.
Okay. What is the capacity of the ASR and how full is it today?
It is about 152,000 acre feet. Capacity is about 225,000 acre feet.
So it's got about 75,000 acre feet available for storage today?
Yes.
Just about, okay.
Yes, sir.
And how much is going to come out of the desal plant?
Currently, its maximum is about 13,000 acre feet.
But are there plans on the table to go ahead and increase that?
By on the table, not immediately. It is our backup plan. For example, if we get cut back by the project company or the district and we see a need, we can expand that plant. I don't know if you've been there. I need to take you out there.
I'd like to, yeah.
And you'll see that essentially it's been built for expansion. We're using half of the facility under the roof, and the other half is there just essentially almost turn on, add some pumps, and you can have an expansion fairly easily. So it'd be a matter of 1 or 2 years before you could expand it quickly.
Okay. You know, I think I share a concern that some of us have, is that we're going to be paying $1,600 an acre foot, and I don't know if anyone's going to want to buy that water at $1,600 an acre foot, and if we end up selling it at $500 or $200 or whatever, it seems like everybody else is getting a bargain but us.
And the key to that is if. So, we have to make sure that we take care of those ifs. But so far, what our philosophy is, what we've been telling individuals is, yes, today it is very expensive, but it's a firm yield, and it is the price is guaranteed for 30 years. So that's very attractive to a lot of entities.
So we would give them a long-term commitment.
Well, it's all negotiation. There are some that want a full 30 years. There are others. There was a developer, for example, that wanted a grow-in period of only 5 years. So there's a lot of opportunities, and a lot of this is guidance that we're going to need from our board and from our council that says, throw it out there. We don't want to have contracts that are less than, 5 years. You can't sell the price for less than this amount. I've already heard that we want to make sure that these communities, if they do purchase our water, also with it purchase our conservation ethics. So those kinds of parameters are what we're soliciting from our board and from council.
What's our investment to complete the acceptance facility in my district, District 9? What is the overall cost of that, and then to distribute that into Stone Oak and the north central part of town?
Are you talking just about the terminus site or the whole project?
No, I mean our share, because they're paying for the pipeline to us. It's just
We
from
have
our
budgeted
connection.
$142 million for that project. Is right?
Was that the original amount? I thought it was somewhere in the 30s, or maybe I heard wrong.
If you're no, it was never that low. But different numbers have been floated at different times in planning stages. But right now it's 142. Is that correct? 146.
$146 million, and that would distribute it, would accept it, would treat it to where it was the standards of the aquifer, right?
Correct, yes.
And then it would distribute it, and the distribution is right now set for pretty much north central part of San Antonio?
Well, it depends on the time of the year. On a hot summer, hot, dry months, days, the water would probably stay in this area. A cold, rainy day could even get further south from here, but essentially this area.
Okay. I have no other questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilman Courage. Councilman Perry.
Thank you, sir. Just a few questions here, Robert. Aren't there some changes happening at the state level as far as water distribution and supply?
Yes, and some did happen. Unfortunately, they got vetoed.
Okay.
And what I'm talking about, for example, is something that Councilman Sandoval talked about is the permits, the transportation permit that would have allowed the time period to coincide with this project was passed by Representative Larson, but Governor Abbott vetoed that legislation.
Okay. Do you suspect that's going to be brought up again this next session?
The bill definitely will be filed again. Obviously, it passed, and the majority of the legislature agreed it was a good bill. It was a personal issue between the governor and Lyle Larson. So we have a very hard decision to make whether we're going to ask someone else to help us with that bill or whether Representative Larson and Abbott have mended their ways. It's still to be determined.
Okay.
But we are going to attempt to pass that legislation. And it's not just for us. For example, there's a lot of other entities that want that type of legislation.
Okay. But the bottom line is those water districts, as you said, sir, could decide to turn the taps off in the future?
Yes, they have to. They could. Yes, the answer is yes. But there's a lot that goes into it. For example, the further you get along with this project, the more money you have in the ground, the more money that's going to the district, because the district gets paid by the amount of water that's pumped out of their district. The more accustomed they get to that revenue flow, we believe the less likely they will to make any drastic cuts. For example, in Gonzales County, our project there, they've made their cut that they wanted way back before the project even came online. So we are comfortable with what their situation is now. They still obviously could change, but we monitor it very well, and they've seen that the aquifer can sustain itself by what is already withdrawn from that particular part of the Carrizo in Gonzales County.
So let's say that did happen sometime in the future, or even now. You said that we had a couple of options there. One was the desal plant, to expand that. And you mentioned that it was about 13,000.
Right now, the capacity is 13,000, yes.
Okay. And we had the capability to expand that up, that we could go up to 50,000.
Well, the initial next phase is another 13,000.
So about half.
Half. The third phase is about another 10,000. Once you get to the third phase and probably on, you probably have to get the source water from the surrounding counties, Atascosa and Wilson. And that's why we stayed, I talked about how difficult it is, these politics. That's why we stayed within Bexar County and only getting Bexar County brackish water to avoid the politics in those. So we're thinking when this time period comes, we will have shown by continuous yearly pumping that it does not adversely affect the fresh water there, and they'll be more likely to be willing to lease their brackish water.
So over time, you think that's going to settle out with the brackish water, but isn't there also something at the state level that they're talking about brackish water rights and easing those restrictions?
Yes, and that's a very, it's not as difficult as fresh water because we are talking about brackish, but it's still issues that we have to push through the legislature. One man's brackish water is another man's fresh water. There's, some communities use semi-brackish. How do you define brackish? How brackish is brackish? So all those kinds of issues we're pushing in the legislature to make sure that we get the relief that we need to be able to lessen some of the regulatory issues over this plant.
Okay. And this is kind of where I'm heading up here to with the decision to go with Vista Ridge, and it's already down the road, and I support it. But going back on that, why didn't we look at, instead of I think it was $3 billion over 30 years, why didn't we look at developing our desal plants instead of running water 150 miles?
Well, we did, and that was the plan for a long time, is to continuously expand the brackish plant. And they're very easily expandable, and so that was our plan to meet our water needs in the future. This opportunity came up. It's a once-in-a-generation type of opportunity in the sense that there's a groundwater district that's willing to issue permits for more than 5 years, more than 10 years, in this case 30 and 40 years. A groundwater district whose philosophy was to the farmers, to the landowners, if you have a cow and you want to sell it, sell it. If you want water and you want to sell it, sell it. It's a private property right, just like there's some regulations on private property. There's some regulations on the groundwater, but essentially their philosophy is we're going to permit everybody that wants to take out water, and if necessary, everybody gets a haircut. Everybody gets proportionally ratcheted down. But if you want water, we're going to give you water.
So was there an economic analysis done between expanding the desal plants versus the
yes, we looked into the cost of both. They were roughly the same. This $3.1 billion number is financing. The big part of it is financing. Mm-hmm. So if you take that into consideration, and our desal plant that is a different type of financing, the numbers were comparable.
Okay, so the numbers were comparable, and how much per acre foot of cost was there a differential between the Vista Ridge and the desal plants?
The desal plant currently is 1,300. What's that slide that has? See, here you'll see the cost of our different water sources. And desal, which is groundwater.
Where's the desal number? Okay, so 1,300 versus 1,900? Okay, so 13 versus 16. And again, I am not, well, I guess I am kind of poking holes in the decisions that were made in the past. I fully support the Vista Ridge now because those decisions were made, but I look at it, we could have developed our own resources within this area and maybe in Atascosa, those counties as rules changed, but to invest $3 billion in this area versus in a pipeline 140 miles long. That's just, I'm still struggling with that.
Well,
again, I support the Vista Ridge. We're already down the road, but looking at the numbers for the desal plant, I'm having a hard time with
Doug's
that.
dying to say something, so let him say
Sure.
something.
I know he's dying to get in there.
The figure you see there, the 1374, that's our existing Bear County brackish desal plant. What we were looking at to get 50,000 acre feet, as Robert said, we were going to have to go quite a ways into Wilson County, and it was going to be comparable. It was going to be close to $2,000 an acre foot, very similar, maybe north of that, compared to what we've got here with this project. So I don't want you to think, okay, we could have saved a bundle of money. We do have some expansion opportunities, but as Robert said, we have phase 2 and phase 3 that can be developed reasonably economically, but they don't provide 50,000 acre feet.
But we don't need 50,000 acre
Well,
feet today.
Today we
Or
don't, but long
Until
term we
another,
do need that.
a long term out there.
Fairly, it depends on what is the drought of record and when is it going to occur.
Yeah, but okay. Again, I'm just kind of
Second
trying
guessing.
to figure out the logic of this and why we didn't invest that $3 billion here over 30 years, where we could have developed that project here instead of along a 150-mile stretch of pipeline.
Because the costs were comparable, and the lost opportunity of letting that Vista Ridge project go, it would have been gobbled up by someone else, and
I got
up
you.
into others.
I got you.
But we went through it, Councilman Perry. We went through the whole logistics of it.
Yeah, and just was it ever discussed to take this to the voters for a vote?
Not by us. It was not discussed by us, but others did talk about it.
Did the council discuss that?
No.
Okay. All right. Great. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Councilman Perry. Councilman Trevino.
Thank you, Mayor. You discussed that slide, some existing infrastructure that you wanted to reuse. I forget what slide that was.
The infrastructure here in Bear County?
Yeah. There you go. Oh, so can you tell us a little bit about this? What is the projected lifespan of this infrastructure?
50 years. 50 years.
No further questions, Mayor? Thanks.
And if I may add, one reason we know that is we have a technology where we essentially put in a sonar inside the pipe and let it travel throughout the pipe, getting readings as to the condition of that pipe to be able to say 50 years.
No, that's great. I mean, I guess my point is, like, I was just kind of curious. You mentioned that you were going to use existing infrastructure, and my concern is always with the lifespan of existing infrastructure. But with 50 years, I mean, that sounds pretty robust.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councilman Trevino. Councilwoman Sandoval.
Thank you. Robert, I was a little confused. So you said that you issued an RFP, but you said that this opportunity was once like in a generation. So did you discover the opportunity after the RFP came out, or you knew that it was there?
We knew that Post Oak Savannah was the type of groundwater district that had a different philosophy than almost all of them. We did not know to the extent that Blue Water had the leases that they had. In other words, over 600 landowners, about 600 landowners, and collectively they had over 3,000 leases. We didn't know that part. We didn't know that Abengoa, for example, was able to do the financing on all these on this type of project, and we did not know that they would actually be willing to take on that risk, the volume risk, the pumping risk. Those are the things that, in our opinion, were once in a lifetime type of opportunities that we did not want to let go. Desal was going to be there for us throughout the years, and we can use that as a backup to if we grow at a much faster pace to bring those that project online, those expansions online.
So the desal might not have been enough if we had just done that?
We are growing at a very fast pace, yes.
So the comparison that you did between Vista Ridge and the brackish water at the desal, is that something that we can see?
Yes, we can show you the numbers on how what we think the cost would be to bring in the water to expand it to 50,000 acre feet. So we'll get that together and make an appointment to go over those with you.
Well, you already have it, right? Because you used
Yes.
it in your evaluation
Yes.
prior. So then that proposal didn't compete with the
Oh.
9 submissions that came in?
No, I think we're talking about two different things. We
Okay.
have information as to what it would cost to expand our brackish plant, and therefore go a different route. Yeah, we have that information. But the 9 proposals that was not one of them. That was not one of them.
And why wasn't that evaluated against the brackish proposal or option?
Well, I guess it was not one of the proposals.
Right.
But it was compared to the 9 proposals. In other words, we had an opportunity to get 50,000 acre feet through these 9 different entities that submitted. And we always knew that we had an opportunity with desal and what it would cost. But we chose to go this route with the Vista Ridge route instead of the desal route.
Even though, sorry, I'm
I can
confused. but-
maybe give a council perspective on that question. In 2013 or 14, there were 9 proposals out. Actually, in 2012, the RFP came back and competitive sealed proposal for 50,000 acre feet of water. The responses that came back were unsatisfactory because they all put the risk of construction, of receiving the water, of the volume risk, all on the SAWS customer. At that time, they canceled everything and went full into the desal project. The SAWS board decided to take up one of those projects and try to negotiate the risk out of it. That's what became the Vista Ridge project. And the reason why it's unique is because this is the project that bore no risk onto the SAWS customer in terms of construction, political, volume risk, and so forth. And that's why, Robert, why I'm pushing so hard on the issue of risk mitigation, because if we can answer those questions, then it undercuts the whole reason why we began the project in the first place. I didn't mean to take the floor from you, Councilwoman. You still have
I think that you did. I'm thanking you that you did.
Okay. No, Councilwoman.
That's fine. Thank you,
okay.
Mayor.
I have nobody else signed up to speak. If Councilman Courage.
I just want to clarify one thing. Could you go back to the chart that showed all the participants,
All of the
all of the partners that were on that original one? It had Abengoa at the top and the others. Yes, that one. Yeah. I just want to make sure to my own mind, nobody involved in any of those organizations on that list ever talked to SAWS about any of that water that might be out there before an RFP was put out. Is that correct?
well, before,
Yeah. No one talked about the water or any, I've been going, none of them. You know, Pape Dawson, no one talked to anybody in SAWS about that before the RFP went out. Is that correct?
I'm not sure if I understand your question.
Well, I'm just wondering, was the RFP tailored for
Oh,
a certain
no.
company
Oh,
to
no,
come out
no.
with the winning bid?
No, of course not.
So no one talked with
No.
anybody at SAWS about
No,
it
it was a
before that?
competitive seal proposal request, and no, we have a blackout period somewhat just like the city does.
Yeah, but that's after the proposal goes out. I'm just wondering if anybody
Before,
talked to
no,
anybody
they
before
did
the
not say,
proposal.
as a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons we did it this way is because when I joined SAWS, having all of the friends out there that I knew, they all were my new best friend for a different reason. That's because they wanted to sell water. And that's one of the reasons why I wanted it done this way is because there were so many people coming knocking on my door without a competitive way of deciding what is
Just in time, I had